Hello, everyone. So I don't know if anyone will recognize me. Maybe if I have like a pink square behind my head, it might look more familiar. I'm Jack. I'm here to do a talk on the DAO. This was originally titled The Past, Present, and Future of the DAO, but then I thought that was too boring. So it's the origin, state, and infinite future of the Pocket DAO. And this is our nice DAO brand that we don't make enough use of. So, yep, my name is Jack. I'm the Chief Governance Officer of Pocket Network. This is my, hang on. Animation didn't work. Oh, that sucks. Anyway, so I want to just make a note on the Chief Governance Officer title, because that might, to some of you, seem antithetical to decentralized governance. Like, what the heck? This is a DAO. Why is there like a Chief Governance Officer? Basically, the idea there is it doesn't mean I'm in charge of the DAO, obviously. It means that I'm the DAO's champion within the core leadership team. And when I talk a bit more about what governance is, that I think will make more sense there. I'm also currently leading our community efforts because we view these as being adjacent to governance. We have a vision for the DAO being the future of our organization and the community being the future of our core team of contributors, as well as developer relations efforts as adjacent to community. Before I dive in, I'd just like to mention that it's my birthday. So. Oh. Thank you. So, with that in mind, feel free to leave some feedback on my talk. Thank you. So, let's get started then. So first off, we're going to go over the origin of the DAO. Oh, hang on. Here we go. We're going to go over the origin of the DAO, particularly the philosophy that underpins the design of the DAO. We've thought quite deeply about this for a few years now. I joined Pocket 3 years ago as a part-time governance researcher. And yeah, some of these ideas, Mike and I, Louise, a few others have been discussing for a while, kind of refining over time as we learn more about what Pocket means to us and to everyone in the community. So I think it would be helpful though, because I don't know the sort of experience of everyone in the room, to talk a bit first about the basics of what is governance in my eyes. So governance is all about control structures and accountability. There's a misconception in the crypto space that governance is about day-to-day decision-making. For example, should we change this parameter to this value? Should we fund this project? That's not what governance is about. When I'm thinking about governance, the main considerations here are on a larger level, what are the control structures? How are people in power held accountable? And how do these control structures evolve over time? The goal with that being that we can provide everyone in the community a framework for them to be the ones that obviously make the decisions. Why do we need good governance? Well, first up, smart contracts are dumb, even though crypto loves this idea of smart contracts. The majority of contracts that we participate in are inevitably going to fail because they are all inherently implicit, meaning there's many contracts that we all belong to that are unspoken. an example being the social contract of just living in society, but also incomplete, meaning we can't perfectly predict everything that might happen. And so when contracts fail, inevitably disputes are going to arise because there's no rules or terms defining what should happen in a certain scenario. And governance determines what will happen when there's a dispute, who will have the power to resolve that dispute. As an example, I mentioned social contract. When social contracts in the US fail, that's when the legal system comes in, and ultimately the Supreme Court is the entity with the power to resolve those disputes. And going away from the political view, more in a business view, good governance is actually a significant competitive advantage. Good governance will ultimately enable us to adapt more to our environment, to changes in the industry, regulatory changes, etc. Another interesting point here that resonates with me is actually a way to attract any disgruntled former users or node runners or participants of other projects that had worse governance or less representative and so on. We can be essentially, we can have a gravitational pull if we have good governance, and that can lead to network effects in a project. And this was quite a nice quote, quite prescient because it's from 2007, and it wasn't even about Web3 or blockchain. It was about like Web2, walled gardens, and so on. That the governance system with the most utility for the largest number of users will, and the least overhead to maintain it, will ultimately have the largest communities with the most valuable data. And given what we're working on, I think that's quite relevant to us. So I'm going to go over a few governance design considerations as well. First up, again, this is a sort of business lens. We are going through a dominant design process in a brand new technology, and it's been widely observed that second movers in these processes are more likely to survive because they don't have to commit to a path of path-dependent design choices. They don't incur the expense of going down that path, and then they're not ultimately locked in when it turns out something else has transpired that is more effective. These pictures are some examples of early designs of technology that ultimately got supplanted. We've got a three-wheeled car, the Betamax, and a Pebble smartwatch. We can't predict what governance innovations may come down the road, so that's not to say that we shouldn't have any governance design. We shouldn't just like have it be a free-for-all, but we should try to be minimal and modular with how we think about the design of our governance. Governance ossifies, and this is related to these ideas of path dependence I was talking about. The structure you design today will be in charge of changing itself, because the people that are making the decisions about these changes ultimately benefit from the status quo. They are in power, and making a change may reduce their power. So we need to consider as well that, as an example here, let's say we as a DAO decided we wanted to abandon any idea of one person, one vote democracy. We wanted to do token-weighted voting, and we implemented that. We decided, oh, later on, that was a bad idea, we should change to something else. It's the token holders that would be in charge of whether we change to something else, and they may not want to do that. So always something to keep in mind when we're thinking about iterations to the DAO. Inflexible institutions are more likely to break. It's been widely observed, and I think it's quite intuitive, that if constitutions and laws and anything that governs how we as a society, as humans, coordinate, can't evolve with the times, can't respond to feedback from the community, the stakeholders, they'll ultimately be overthrown by those people. I think a nice succinct way to put it is institutional evolution prevents institutional revolution. Modularity leads to more value in a system. So the more modular our design is, the more paths that we have the option to go down at any given time, which means more innovations that we can potentially pursue, and ultimately the potential value of the system is higher. So that's kind of a nice economic way to think about it. And the last consideration here for design is that legitimacy is ultimately the most important part of a governance system. And what legitimacy means is it's a rule that has been accepted by those people that are operating within the rule set. A nice parallel here is, and I'm trying to bring in lots of parallels from the business world, startups and so on, because we are also, as well as Mike said in his talk, building a new institution that will rival nation states, religions. We are also a startup institution, so we need to think in that way too. And as far as governance is concerned, legitimacy is basically our traction. It's a sign that there is a good fit between the rule that we've designed and the community that's impacted by that rule. And if we don't have legitimacy, that means rules are going to be rejected, and we'll just end up with a free-for-all. So if we can summarize all of that, our design problem is essentially that we want to maximize our future governance design options, the flexibility of these institutions that we're building, without undermining the legitimacy. I'm realizing that I'm standing in front of quotes on the bottom, but this was a quote from 1991, an academic that is an expert in institutions, and he basically said that this constrained optimization problem, as I'm putting it, is inherent to all institutional design. So if we can, that was all quite theoretical, let's try to put it into something tangible, an actual design, an actual structure that we can use. And in comes the lean Trias Politica. Trias Politica is also known as separation of powers model of governance. It's the model that all nation-state governments, or the majority of nation-state governments, use. And essentially it all revolves around checks and balances, ultimately with the goal of preventing any kind of concentration of power by splitting that power up into the power to set policies, which is the legislative, the House of Commons in Britain, the Congress in the US, the ability to enact policies, which is the executive branch, so the president in the United States. There's a great article applying this model to crypto by Lawrence Lundy Bryan from Outlier Ventures, and he defined the executive as being the core devs. They're the ones that are implementing protocol upgrade, the coding, the protocol upgrades, and so on. And the ability to enforce rules, which is the judiciary, this is the Supreme Court, and in our case, this would be the validators. This is quite a helpful diagram to think about separation of powers and checks and balances that we're implementing. The key here is that the judicial branch is able to review what the executive is doing and veto anything that the executive does. And ultimately, this means that the executive, I'll talk about this more, but it essentially enables what we might call an optimistic system, where the executive, for the most part, has freedom to act efficiently, effectively, but if they step out of line, the judicial branch can come in. Another startup parallel. What we're trying to do here is minimum viable governance. We're trying to build the minimum governance system that works to achieve at least legitimacy, and then build from there as we learn from the community. And this is actually the process we've been going through since we launched the DAO in late 2020. You probably all, or a few of you, are familiar with some of the friction points in the DAO experience. We essentially have a system that's been assembled in a no-code fashion from Discord bots, Discord roles. We did do some code. We have a non-transferable voting token and a snapshot voting dashboard. And this was essentially our minimum viable system of this vision that we have. Ultimately, we will be working towards a more polished, customized governance dashboard, but this minimum system got us to where we are today. I'm going to skip over this quickly, but basically we also have a DAO constitution. The idea behind that is it's a human readable written agreement that defines all of our values that we're upholding, the direction we want to evolve within, what the rights are of the participants, how those rights are protected and enforced. A constitutional layer requires a strong judiciary to enforce it. We have a great judicial enforcement on the foundation side. We have foundation articles that enable the DAO to hire and fire members of the foundation, directors of the foundation. One thing that is a weaker part is the validators are a key part of this judicial function, and there's no real way to, at the moment, tie validators tightly to a constitution. We've got validators are operating by their protocol code. We have this human readable contract. So that's something that will need to be worked on over time. But let's take a step back and see what the original vision of the DAO was based on all of these ideas. So we have here the legislative branch. In fact, I've got a laser. Legislative branch, judiciary, executive. These are the citizens and any kind of external parties that the DAO is contracting with. This is outdated, so I just want to kind of explain a little how it's outdated. So early on, we had this idea of doing governance stakes, where people would have to stake some pocket, in a minimum in a pocket that would be specifically for participating in governance. And then there would be an oracle that would basically recognize that the stake happened and attribute a vote based on it. We have this council, which is essentially what we do have today with the votes that are earned through the arcade, pocket arcade trophy system. And then the idea was that we would use this Aragon agent system. It was one of a few tools that Aragon was building. Aragon is a DAO platform, for those who don't know. We also were going to be using Aragon Court. They have a system for essentially using, it's essentially an incentivized, decentralized Web3 Supreme Court escalation system that would be able to, we would basically slot it in between the proposal being submitted and it being executed, and if anyone objected on the grounds of the Constitution, this court would be able to rule on, yeah, this violates the Constitution, etc. Ultimately, these didn't really hold up to their original vision, so we had to sort of think differently. There's also, we were quite optimistic about the possibility of using a smart contract DAO system that could execute directly into the Pocket blockchain, but there's a lot of problems to solve there with secure cross-chain messaging and so on. So ultimately, that also didn't come to pass. But I'm about to talk about the current state of the DAO and where we're heading, and I am quite optimistic that we are going to see a true vision of a Trias Politica, separation of powers, regardless of these things not coming to pass. So yeah, let's have a look at the DAO today. So first off, we have a legislative branch. This is all off-chain. This is what we might consider a citizens' democracy. We have a one-person, one-vote system. Currently, we have 24 voters. I'll go through who those people are. But essentially, we don't have the benefit of nation states of saying, oh yeah, these people were born in this country, therefore they're citizens. We don't have birth certificates. We need a way to prove that someone is a citizen of Pocket, so we have a qualification system where people can earn trophies for doing certain activities in the community, and if they earn enough of these trophies, they qualify. They also, because we're in a virtual world, we don't have the benefit of being able to know that a virtual persona is unique and not a sock puppet. So we also have a verification step, which was originally Bright ID, still is Bright ID, and is going to be replaced by Coordinate. I'll talk a bit more about that. But yeah, essentially our goals are we want this citizens' democracy to be representative of citizens in Pocket Network. We want it to be Sybil resistant, no sock puppets, and we want it to protect minority stakeholders. So an example here might be if we had a system where people were voted in by a majority of existing citizens, you're going to end up with essentially a popularity contest where people are unfairly not being let into the DAO. See, how am I doing for time? Okay. So these are the 24 voters that we currently have. So we have 6, I get asked this question a lot. We have 6 core team members on the DAO. However, 2 of those core team members actually, interestingly, got their vote in the DAO before becoming core team members, which I think is quite nice. We're recruiting from the community as well. So yeah, we've got Alberto up here, Alex, Natural Nodes, Arthur, all core team. Chris OG, core team. He is one of the people who got the vote before becoming a core team member. And we have Rich over here. We have 5 builders / node runners in the DAO. So we've got Ben Van, we've got Pierre from Thunderstake, we've got 2 folks from the Pocket Fund Wallet Project, Pocket Blade and Pocket Dachi, and we've got Shane from NodePilot. We have 2 node runners. We have 2 people who are only node runners. They don't fall under the other category of builder or whatever. That's Chainflow, Simply Staking. We have 1 developer user of Pocket, 3 investors, so that's Eden Block, Metacartel Ventures, and Blockwall Capital. And then 7 community members, obviously probably node runners as well, but not like a node provider. So yeah, and so that's 24 voters at the moment, pretty even distribution of stakeholder types. We do have 6 people who are qualified for a vote, but haven't done that verification step because Bright ID sucks. Sorry, this is recorded, you'll have to edit that out. But yeah, so they're waiting to get verified, and then, so we will have 30 at that point. But I will admit, that's not as much as I would like. There's problems with the system currently, so hopefully this year I would hope we would be in the hundreds of voters. Okay, so Bright ID is a bit of a black box. We don't have control over the social graph. Take a step back. The way it works is there's a social graph. You get scored based on how deep in the middle of that social graph you are. You connect with people, and then at a certain point, although that's unclear what that threshold is, the system has enough confidence that you're a unique human being, and you get verified. Jinx can attest that he verified with like dozens of community members before Bright ID recognized him, and part of that is because we have a lot of our community at the edges of Bright ID's social graph, and ultimately, it's because of that, we're not going to as easily verify each other as someone that's very close to the Bright ID ecosystem. So the idea to fix this is moving to Coordinate, which is not designed for this, but it has a component that helps here. and ultimately we control the social graph. Essentially, the coordinate has circles of contributors, and existing circle members nominate and vouch for new circle members, so we can use it in the same manner. We would then be assigning a role to people based on their membership of these circles, and ultimately this all feeds back into this minimum viable Discord bot system that we currently have. We would need to start a practice of bi-weekly governance calls. It's something I've been wanting to do for a while now. A place for us to discuss proposals, but also get to know each other. And getting to know each other, we'll be able to verify that we are unique human beings, that we are stakeholders in the Pocket ecosystem. And ultimately, initially it will take a bit of work, but I feel that if we are doing a regular cadence of that, we'll be able to start onboarding people into the DAO in no time. Okay, this is a really wordy slide, but it looks like legalese as well, but that's because it is. This is a legal innovation that we had, that we made a while ago. We have an ownerless foundation for the DAO. And ownerless means that there's no one who can claim a right to the assets held by that foundation. There's no members, there's no beneficiaries. Ultimately, the foundation is accountable only to the DAO, as written in its articles of association. And we have our own little separation of powers system here, where the DAO can appoint and remove directors and supervisors. And the directors and supervisors can appoint and remove each other based on the DAO instructing them to. So they kind of keep each other in check and do what the DAO bids. Let's see, I'm struggling with the words myself. So yeah, and I've had a few questions about this, about who works for the foundation, who works for Pocket Network Incorporated, how all of that's set up. And that is something that we need to be more transparent about. So I will be working on documentation for everything involving governance, but particularly this, explaining how the organizations are structured. But essentially, there's very few people that actually belong to the foundation as an entity. It's designed as a legal wrapper to the DAO that is able to execute the DAO's will on-chain and own the IP for the DAO, which is helpful with navigating the legal structure and so on. So the foundation owns the majority of, perhaps all, Pocket Network IP and contracts with Pocket Network Incorporated, who provide services to the foundation and thus the DAO, since the foundation represents the DAO, on things such as maintaining the portal, updating any features in the portal, wallet, explorer, the protocol upgrades, and also things like implementing WAGMI adjustments. WAGMI has outlined a schedule of adjustments to the minting parameter. It's actually myself and Adam are quite heavily involved in just calculating what the new WAGMI value is based on this schedule, and it's ultimately the foundation that submits that parameter change. All the core team, developers, engineers, etc., are currently employed by Pocket Network Incorporated for benefits. The employee relationships are ultimately better for workers than being freelance contractors. So we have discussed moving the growth organization over to the foundation, but that's there's a lot of things to figure out there because the foundation is based in the Cayman Islands. The majority of us are in the United States and so on. So yeah, as far as who is on the foundation, the supervisor of the foundation, who has the power to remove directors on behalf of the DAO, is Pocket Network Incorporated, because corporations, entities can be these members. And the directors of the foundation are Nelson Ryan, who was on the investor panel yesterday, and Stefan Goslin, also known as the GoStep, from the Alchemist community. So I'll also be making sure that all of this information is on the documentation, so there's no feeling of it being a black box, etc. And the last branch is the judiciary, and I think we can consider the judiciary to be validators. So when governance decisions are implemented in Pocket Network, they're submitted as transactions to the chain. We have 3 types of governance transactions. We have a transfer, a parameter change, and an upgrade. Transfer means we are paying Pocket out from the DAO treasury, which is, I think, about 70 million Pocket or something at this point. Parameter change, we have about 50 parameters, minting rate, minimum stake, etc. These get changed by a transaction as well. And when there's a new version of the protocol that has the consensus rule change, this is actually held dormant initially and is not activated until the upgrade transaction is submitted. So the validators are, the reason they're the judiciary is they're ultimately the people who decide whether transactions get accepted into the blockchain. I think I can say with confidence that they are an incentive-aligned judiciary because you could argue they are also nodes, so maybe they would side with the nodes. Maybe they would agree with, for example, increasing how much nodes get paid. But they also benefit when there's more relays overall because they get a percentage of the total block reward. So they also have an incentive to make sure that apps are happy. So I think in V0, validators are a good judiciary, but also one thing to note is in V1, validators will actually be more neutral because they won't be bundled with servicers. They will be purely looking for that block reward. So there's a big debate in crypto about on-chain governance, about whether governance should be done on-chain or off-chain. We have projects like Decred and Tezos that do full on-chain governance, and essentially the idea is that all the voting takes place on-chain. People often criticize it because they feel that it's vulnerable to being captured by whales, by token holders. Conversely, we've got projects like Bitcoin and Ethereum that are full off-chain, and these are less vulnerable to capture, but are criticized for potentially being harder to coordinate. Well, Pocket, I think, is neither of these. I'm now thinking of Pocket as being optimistic on-chain governance. We do all of our voting off-chain, but as I described in the previous slide, we submit decisions as transactions, and then we have an on-chain, essentially an on-chain voting process that determines whether these transactions actually make it into the block. This avoids the capture risks of full on-chain governance because token holders, whales, can't actually create transactions, they can only veto them. So I think we, in that case, get the benefits of the best of both worlds. The other added benefit is that we limit chain bloat from voting on chain. So last section here is talking about the future of the DAO. So we now understand the philosophy underpinning the DAO. We understand how the DAO is currently structured, how things are working. I want to talk a little bit about some weaknesses I observe in the current state of the DAO and where I see us heading in the future. So first up, I think we need to strengthen this judiciary. Validators can reject transactions, but they have very little time to review those transactions before they're included in a block. And also a coordination problem where we would need a majority of validators to basically, within the transaction being submitted to the mempool and before it's included in the block, agree to reject that. So the solution here, I've discussed it with the protocol team and it seems like it would be viable, is we already have a height function for the upgrade transaction. We're able to specify the block height at which we think the consensus upgrade, we want the consensus upgrade to take place. Well, what if we apply that height to every governance transaction and then automatically reject a transaction if it's not allowing for enough time to review the transaction? And then we add a new governance transaction that all validators can use called a gov veto. And then, so essentially, the change will be that whenever a parameter change is submitted, a treasury payment submitted, these will be time delayed by, let's say, 7 days. And in that period, validators will be able to review the transaction, make sure that nothing untoward is happening, and then veto it if it is. We'd obviously also have to build tooling that would help with interpreting the on-chain data. We would have like a governance dashboard that would show the queue of transactions that are taking place and make it really easy for validators to perform that judicial function. On the executive side, the foundation multisig, which executes these governance transactions that the DAO approves through proposals, is a bit of a bottleneck on enacting those proposals. An example here, a perfect example, is WAGMI. We are manually adjusting WAGMI based on the 30-day trailing average of the relay count. We are unable to programmatically specify values for parameters. We can only have a fixed value for a parameter, and we have to manually change that every time. So a solution here is, instead of fixed values, the idea that we could actually pass in a script with logic leveraging on-chain data that would automatically adjust the parameter based on that on-chain data. WAGMI, again, is a perfect example here because all we're doing is adjusting WAGMI based on the 30-day trailing average relay count. We can theoretically use on-chain relay data to automatically adjust that. One thing to note is that this would likely be a V1 feature. Also on the executive, again, trying to address the bottleneck. All the permissions for the access control list for all the parameter changes, governance upgrades, treasury payments are held by the foundation multisig. Initially, this is the case because for security reasons. The foundation is accountable to the DAO, so they can be trusted to hold all those permissions. If we just gave it to a random committee, we're making ourselves vulnerable to attack. However, if we're going to have a strong judiciary, if we're using this optimistic on-chain governance model, we can potentially give an executive function more freedom to act with their own discretion. We no longer rely on the foundation having that relationship with the DAO. So with that being the case, we can actually start to empower committees of community members to hold specific permissions. The foundation is actually able to delegate those permissions to those committees and then also revoke those permissions, all according to the will of the DAO. So rather than the DAO voting on every parameter change, the DAO might vote once to delegate a parameter to a committee of experts, monitor them, see how they're doing. The judiciary can block any malicious transactions, and then if the citizens feel that the committee has outlived its usefulness or has become malicious, they can revoke those permissions and appoint a new committee. And this idea can also, it's quite a simple building block that can be wrapped in all sorts of structures and programs. As an example, we've talked about Triforce, this initiative to try and empower working groups within the community to be responsible for specific chains and to grow those chains. Well, the Triforce committee could be the ones responsible for the supported blockchain parameter, which is what we use to whitelist blockchains for earning block rewards. It makes no sense for, if we are using a Triforce model, it makes no sense for someone else to hold that permission. Might as well let the people running it take care of that. So Lastly, and I think this is probably the thing that a lot of you were hoping to hear more about, is dealing with the friction in the DAO to getting a vote in the DAO. I think one of our biggest weaknesses that we need to address is that the system for getting a vote is borderline disenfranchising, because it's high friction, it's arbitrary in some cases, and frustratingly bureaucratic, which is kind of against the whole point of DAOs. Like, we should be striving for greater coordination efficiency rather than introducing red tape. So, and I am very aware of that. So the reason this is a big problem is it leads to governance apathy. There's a lot of people in the community who are really core to the community, but don't participate in voting. They don't have a vote, and I think that's a real problem, and it's not their fault. It's our fault, my fault. And the other thing is that this can undermine voter representation as well. We have 24 voters. We should have a lot more. And with imbalances in how easy certain paths are to claiming a vote, we run the risk of enabling certain categories of stakeholders to be massively overweighted within the voter set than others. So this is something I very much want to improve on. So there's a few ideas here. One is we can automate how we verify that a trophy was done. There's all sorts of trophies out there that are all revolving around on-chain activities. There's no reason we can't have a system where you sign your node automatically, you run a script to bulk sign all your nodes, and then we automatically assign or reward trophies based on how many relays you've done, how many blocks you produced, etc. We also, when a trophy needs to be manually verified, like these community quests, we can distribute that to higher level community members. We are also thinking about another issue that we've noticed is we have a pathing system. So to get a vote in the DAO, you need to go deep enough within a specific category, so community, node, etc. There are people that are broader participants in the community. They dabble in community stuff, they dabble in node stuff, and they also build stuff. They are currently disadvantaged compared to someone that just goes deep into one, and I think that shouldn't be the case. So we're considering moving towards a points-based system where you can do a whole bunch of different activities in the community and ultimately accumulate enough points to get to a confidence level within the system that you are a stakeholder, you're a citizen of Pocket. Also, we lack trophies for contributors. We have people in the community that are building amazing stuff. We've got like Pocket Scan. As far as I'm aware, no one from Pocket Scan has a vote. Until recently, no one from Thunderstake had a vote, despite working on a number of amazing stuff. So I think we need to add contributor trophies that would essentially fast-track votes, because if you're building something valuable for the ecosystem, I think that's about one of the highest level things that you can do to prove that you're a citizen of Pocket. So so that's that. And then, I'm done. So, very smooth ending. So I just want to say, like, a lot of that was quite theoretical. I didn't leave myself much time for Q&A. However, this was partially intentional. My main goal was to give you all the context on how we're thinking about governance, our philosophy behind it, why we've made certain choices that we have. Like, the trophy system's not arbitrary. There's a motive behind it, even if there is a friction there. And to give you frameworks for thinking about how we would want to design governance so that when we are collectively talking about improvements to the DAO. We're all kind of thinking about it in similar ways. And that's not to say these frameworks are the truth, but I think it would be helpful to align there. And ultimately, we have an unconference taking place after lunch, all afternoon. It's a model where we can all group up into roundtables to discuss any topics that we want to discuss. So my thinking was, this is right before lunch, that's right after lunch, we can do Q&A during that process. So if any of you really enjoyed this talk and want to talk more about the future of the DAO and have any ideas that you want to push forward, any feedback about the DAO, any blind spots you think I have personally, or you want to get involved in helping me and other core team members to shape the future of the DAO, then talk to me after. Let's organize an unconference discussion, and yeah, let's dive deep into some of these issues. So. We don't have time for questions, but I thought my meme was quite funny, so I just wanted to. So yeah, also the last slide here. We do have these feedback QR forms, QR codes. I was involved in helping with the agenda for Infracon. We have an amazing core team member called Mike Pumphrey, who's our developer education lead. And he's very keen to get feedback from everyone about different sessions, what worked, what didn't, so that at the next Infracon, we can make it even better. So if you have any feedback on this session, please scan that QR code, and yeah. And we have this Pope as well. You may not have noticed, but we did have Pope QR code printed out at the registration desk during registration. This is another chance to claim the Pope, and also I will make sure that we have Popes printed out at the dinner tonight, etc. And if you still don't see one, feel free to come up to me and say, like, when Pope, sir, or whatever it is they say. So, thank you.